Hello everybody, my name is Spoons Rattling, and thanks to a storm, I'm just going to do another quick video where we are going to do some sort of an overview and ranking of the different Orc exclusive battle traits. Now, in Crusade, generally most things I'd say are completely fine to take for flavor and for fun, but I still want to give my thoughts on them and see how they sort of compare to each other. Mainly because, well, honestly, most of these have pretty powerful abilities and can be very useful to build character. There are a couple that I think are particularly quite weak, and even if you are trying to be flavorful, I'd say there's usually a better way to do it. So first we're going to start up with Bad Reputation. So this is for a Pain Boss or a Pain Boy, and it gives them a 5+ invulnerable save. I don't think this is actually too bad for a Pain Boy, and is honestly something that I would expect most Pain Boys to eventually get, mainly because if you're unfamiliar with how Pain Boys work in Orcish society, they're pretty much completely insane, more so than your regular Orc. So they often just kind of do whatever they want when they're operating on their Orky pals, and which often leads to their subjects being quite upset that they have a new robotic limb they didn't ask for. So many Pain Boys will take to modifying themselves to make them more resilient, more powerful, and of course this usually also deepens their delusions of being a good doc. The one that comes to mind is Mad Doc Grotznick, for example, who had modified his body quite an extensive amount. But regardless, I think this is a rather solid one for your clan's Pain Boy. Next up, we have Bionic Targeters. Now, this one, not only do I really like for its ability, but I also think it's really fluffy for a sort of evolving shooting unit. So Bionic Targeters is only applicable to boys and Beast Snagga boys, and what it does is it gives you a +1 to hit at range. This, of course, is something that wouldn't be expected of Orcs, but Orcs that really do appreciate the shootier side of life often do acquire things like targeting squigs to help them shoot straighter. So in terms of fluff, I mean, it's pretty much as good as it gets, right? Your Orcs are getting better, and therefore they have more teeth, more scrap, whatever it may be, to trade for some fancy upgrades from the mech or the doc to be more shooty, which I think is perfect, and also I think it's just a nice and powerful rule. Next up we have Boss Mech. Now Boss Mech is for a mech, unsurprisingly. When you give him this, that lets you ignore the first failed out-of-action test, or one of your failed out-of-action tests for a vehicle unit if he was in the battle. Now, not only is this generally useful to keep your vehicles operating in tip-top shape, it's also just a cool way to show that your mech has gotten more talented as a growing Orc Tinkerer, for example. Because mechs in general are very useful to Orcs. They make most of their weapons, their gear, and so on. And there's also quite a few rules in Orky Crusades that require a mech to be around. And this, I'd say, is generally useful because there's a lot of Orc vehicles that really appreciate being buffed, but would not appreciate getting some battle scars. So being able to ignore that while keeping your good old Orky contraptions working in tip-top shape, I think is absolutely fantastic. Next up, we have Write 'em Down. This is for your mounted units, and unsurprisingly, that would be either your war bikes or your Squighog boys. I think this is, it makes sense on both of them. Usually when Orcs mount up into something like a war bike or even a Squighog, the reason they're doing it is not only to show their status, but also to go real fast. So this, giving them +1 to advance and charge, just means they go faster compared to all of their compatriots, which is, of course, very, very Orky. You wouldn't have it any other way, right? Definitely. Very solid. Quite like this one. Next up, we have Dakka Lads. Now, unfortunately, this isn't one that I particularly like. Now, if you wanted to use it, there's no reason you couldn't, but it's just kind of strange. Not in a funny way, though. It's once per battle game when your boys unload their Dakka. This is also for only mob units, so Beast Snagga boys are boys. They get to make the enemy take a battle shock test. That's once per game and once only. I'm not really sure what the point of this is. If this was every time they shot, I could see some value in it there, but it doesn't even particularly feel like it adds too much, character-wise in terms of your mob of boys getting more shooty. It just kind of seems arbitrary, really. It's just kind of, what, do they load up the spooky rounds? It doesn't really make sense. It's not very good, and I don't even think it really conveys anything character-wise for a unit of boys. I'm going to put it in D tier for Deca boys. Why not? Dead Choppy. This is honestly kind of like the Choppy equivalent of Bionic Targeters. It allows you to, again, mobs unit only, so boys or Beast Naga boys. It lets you reroll wounds to wound in the turn of the Wa. Just generally pretty dang useful for those orcs that are throwing so many attacks that rerolling ones is super, super useful. It also, of course, just represents the fact that as your orcs win more fights, they get more dangerous. So character-wise, quite like it. Rule-wise, quite like it. Overall, I think it's real solid. So Dead Keen is also for boys or Beast Naga boys and lets you use Heroic Intervention for free once per turn, I believe it is, actually. Now, this one I actually think is pretty fun. I wouldn't say that it's necessarily as powerful as something like Dead Choppy, but it still does have its use. Just in the way that, this allows your boys to jump into a fight. Or wait, no, Dead Keen. Which one is Dead Keen? Hold on. I'm pulling it up on the side. Dead Keen. Dead Keen. Oh, yeah. No, this is just any time you can target this unit with the Heroic Intervention stratagem for 0 CP. So this is honestly pretty useful for any boys that would be guarding something like a Stompa that doesn't really want to be tied up by some chaff. And they can just jump into the battle, really. And what's more orky than some boys just jumping into a fight that they weren't even a part of? So really, I really quite like Dead Keen. In terms of powerfulness, I don't think it's anything special, but I still think it is generally useful for anything that's operating as a bodyguard, just because, well, they get to jump in on something that they can help defend, which is pretty orky while also being pretty useful. Next up, we have the first of the custom jobs. This is Fortress on Wheels. This would be for your trucks or battle wagons. You just add one to their toughness characteristic, and this model has a 5+ invul. This is super useful, and also is pretty easy to convey model-wise, because, I mean, what's more orky than just strapping more metal onto your truck or battle wagon? With a hard case battle wagon, this would be super useful because you would be super tough, toughness 13, and a truck would go all the way up to what is it, toughness 10, or rather toughness 9. With that, which makes them more resilient to a lot of guns, and in general, having that 5+ invul will just make it so that it's really a lot tougher than it normally would be, and trucks are already pretty dang tough, so making them tougher, absolutely fantastic in my opinion. Next up, we have Fungus Fuel Injector. So not only is it very fun to say this name, it is for Speed Freak units only. Now, since this is for vehicles, this would be for things like buggies, and of course, the Deathkiller Wartrike could get this. You can also put it on your planes. Chinork Warcop does, stuff like that from Legends as well. It lets you add 2 inches to the move characteristic of this model, and you get to pop smoke for 0 CP once per game. This is super useful because a lot of those units aren't terribly tough, so just getting to throw smoke for free is super useful. So that's always useful, and moving faster is the orkiest thing a Speed Freak can do. They always want to be going faster, and with certain traits, you could get some pretty hilariously fast units. It's honestly, it's pretty dang cool. Something like, I believe it's the War Buggies? No, they're mounted. Regardless, this is pretty solid. It makes your buggies faster, really good for the melee ones that like to be up close. And any orc unit that can go faster wants to go faster, especially if they're from the Cult of Speed, obviously. Definitely a favorite of mine. Next up, Gnarly Scars. So this is for mob units. And this one, I think, is a better version of Daka Lads, while also effectively being the melee version of Daka Lads. While they are in engagement range, you worsen the enemy units their engagement range with by their leadership by 1. While Battle Shot can still be a little so-so, even in Crusade, it does have its use in just being able to flip objectives, which of course boys are going to be doing quite efficiently. And it just means that if a unit takes all their melee and survives, they're still more likely to fail their battle shock, and also, it just, again, represents, as orcs go on, they accrue more and more scars because they can regenerate from almost any injury. So I think it's just really cool character-wise, as well as, I think it's not, the worst in terms of power, even if it's nothing special. I'm going to put it with B, just because, an orc, bunch of orc boys covered in crazy scars. Generally pretty cool. Next up, we have a high-speed DACA for your mounted units. So again, war bikers, knobs on war bikes, squig hog boys, even war tracks, war buggies, stuff like that. This allows them, whenever they shoot something, just add one to the hit roll. Now, I think this is actually a pretty dang solid upgrade for almost any mounted unit, even something like Squig Hog Boys, because they have those their stickas. They, their shooting's not, it's really not too bad, really. The main thing that they struggle with is hitting, so making them more accurate is just in general very useful. And I mean, especially for Squig Hog Boys, this is just a cool way to show that they're getting better at hunting the big monsters, right? Even though it's +1 to hit on everything, the main thing those stickers are going to be crazy against is vehicles. So being able to hit them more efficiently is just very, very beast snagga in effect, really. I think it really is very solid. Also great for war bikers who historically love to just be speeding at max power while unloading ungodly amounts of DACA. So getting them to shoot more accurately, very useful. Things like the war tracks, war buggies, they can generally have slightly more guns, so they're also going to appreciate it, which is always good. Very solid, very solid. I quite like, either, whoopsie. I think there's some very powerful things you could do with this battle trait, and in general, I quite like it, just because, well, orcs shooting more means they'll hit more things, so it's just the visual of them shooting more items. I'm going to put it here. Next up, Mechanical Mechaniac is for a mech, unsurprisingly, if you couldn't tell by the double mech in this name, and it allows your mech to get a 5+ invulnerable save. Well, not, funnily enough, I don't think quite as characterful as the Pain Boy doing it. I still think this is fine enough. It's not unheard of, or it is actually quite common for orc mechs to start modifying themselves when they get bored of doing the same thing over and over again. So having him effectively become a cyborg is pretty cool, and in general, your mechs are usually going to look pretty mechanical, so I think this just fits really well to have them be that little bit tougher. Which mechs generally appreciate, because if they get their vehicles blown away, they can start to be a little fragile. Overall, I quite like this one. I'm going to put it right next to the Bad Reputation one. I know that these images are obscenely large. I'm not really sure why, but that's just how the website uploaded them for some reason. Opportunistic is for your mobs, so your boys, your Beast Snagga boys. And this is a once per battle ability, which isn't my favorite when it comes to something like this, but I think this does work a lot better than DACA Lads, because this gives you an extra 1 objective control, so they're more efficient at taking objectives, which a lot of orcs, especially those that tend to favor more like the Death Skulls approach, tend to have that sort of rabidness come out when they see something fresh for the taking. So I actually quite like Opportunistic. I think it's nice and characterful, and I'm going to put it at the top of B tier. I quite like it. I mean, it's just your orcs getting a little bit more savage when they see something they want to take. Next up, we have Recycler for the Pain Boys, again, or Pain Boss if you're a Beast Snagga. This is the same as Boss Mech, but just for your Pain Boy. This is usually represented by a Pain Boy doing their sort of sweep and clear, if you will. I'm sure they call it something much less professional. But what Pain Boys tend to do is go out to the battlefield once everything's settled down and start picking up the remnants of orcs and other living beings. And then with those extra resources, it makes it a little easier for them to piece some boys back together. And to represent that, of course, it's, once you get to ignore your first failed, or ignore one of your failed out of action tests for a non-vehicle unit. So I'm just going to put it right next to Mechanical Mechaniac, or rather Boss Mech. I think both of these super useful, and makes it very valuable to include both a Pain Boy and a mech in your army at just about any time, if you're including, of course, a vehicle or infantry, which I presume you would be. Next up, another one of our custom abilities, the Shaka Hole. So the Shaka Hole is something that orcs have had access to in a few different forms, and it's no different here, really. When something attacks it, they have a 4+ chance to take D3 mortal wounds if they fight it in melee, is what I mean. And this is a pretty standard, Orky thing, just rigging your car up to unleash shocks or spikes whenever they get attacked is not uncommon for things like battle wagons. Though, I don't know. I think this one's fine. It's probably going to go into sort of like the B tier where it doesn't do much, but I think it's quite characterful, and I think it could allow for some fun painting opportunities, like if you want to have your battle wagon or your kill crusher, like I'm building as we speak. Cover that with like electricity lines. I think it would look really cool, and then just stick some batteries on the side. It would look pretty cool and would be quite intimidating on the battlefield, so I quite like it. Next we have shootier guns. Now this is for vehicles. Again, it's a custom job, and this one is sort of a Orky randomness thing, which isn't too uncommon, which I quite like. So each time the unit shoots, you roll a d6. On a 1, the unit they have hazardous, rather. So on a 1, you get hazardous. On a 2 to 5, however, you improve the ballistic skill of the weapon by 1. Super useful for orcs. They get to shoot more, and orcs that shoot more are more happy and therefore fight better. And then on a 6, you improve the ballistic skill of the ranged weapon by 1, and those weapons have ignore cover. Super useful for all kinds of orc weaponry. This is great on something like, again, Kill Crush a tank, a Stompa, a Gorkanaut, a Morkanaut, even something like a quad shooty Death Dread would really appreciate this. And in general, it's one of my favorites, mainly just because it opens up a lot of fun possibilities for a lot of orcs to start interacting with each other. So you have your mech, you have your tank, you have whatever's inside the tank, and then they all work together to make this beautiful, beautiful death shooty machine. Next, we have smog belches for our mounted units. So this is, again, for anything that's mounted, whether that be war bikes, war buggies, war tracks, Squighog boys, and it gives them the smoke keyword, and they get to use it for free. So pretty useful because, again, a lot of those units aren't the most tough, so the -1 to hit can be useful. And also, I think it's just a really funny visual with Squighog boys, because I believe the implication is that they have their squigs eat a bunch of dirt, and then when they are in the battlefield, they throw it all up in front of them to effectively make a smoke screen, which is just really funny. And honestly, I think it's quite solid, so I'm going to put it in A tier. I love smog belches. It's just, I don't know why, that's a really funny visual to me. Just a horde of Squighog boys running across the battlefield and then vomiting out clouds of dust is really funny to me. And then finally, we have a old faithful Stomp-O-Matic Pistons. You add, for all walkers except Killicans, so this is great for Death Dreads, Gorkanauts, Mecha Dreads, Mega Dreads, Stompas. You get to add 2 to their move, so they become a lot faster, moving usually like around 10 inches with that. And then you get to add 1 to advance and charge rolls. So in the wall, they effectively get an extra 2 inches of movement plus the extra 2. So it really is a speed boost, and orcs, of course, love going fast. Even the ones that aren't in the cult of speed do appreciate going fast. So this is, of course, great, not just rules-wise, but I think it's really funny to see something like a Stompa stomp across the board, at insane pace, outrunning a lot of other vehicles in the game, mainly because, it's a giant walking trash can. I quite like Stomp-O-Matic Pistons. It's a personal favorite of mine because I love orc walkers. Anyways, I know this has been more of a unfocused video, but honestly, I was just so fried today, and then there was the big storm. So I was a bit lost on what to do, so sorry if this video wasn't quite as entertaining, but hope you enjoyed it. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you all next time.